Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Glad to be here, and I'm really excited for this one.
Yeah, so imagine discovering that the reason you feel so, deeply burned out at work isn't your demanding boss, and it's not your overflowing inbox either.
Right, which is what we usually blame.
Exactly. But what if the actual reason is the subtle way you rolled your eyes at your mother on the phone yesterday afternoon?
Oh, wow. That's deeply uncomfortable.
It is. It's a completely radical premise. But that's exactly the text we are tearing into today for this deep dive.
We're looking at the Confucian Analects today, right?
We are. Specifically, we're focusing on the foundational architecture of books I through 4. So that's COR, Wei Chang, Pa Yi, and Li Jin.
And this isn't going to be, a dry academic history lesson.
No, definitely not. The mission for this deep dive is to completely strip away the historical dust. We're bypassing the purely historical readings to extract the raw, practical, and honestly, sometimes abrasive psychological insights this text offers for 21st century living.
Well, and the structure of the text itself kind of forces that active, practical extraction. I mean, we're dealing with passing conversations, right? Fragmented dialogues.
Yes, it's not a textbook.
Exactly. It's highly situational advice. It's directed at specific students, like some, 自贡 or 分句. Because it lacks that linear structure of a modern philosophical treatise, it really demands that you, the reader, synthesize the underlying framework yourself.
It's like you're watching a doctor diagnose different patients, right?
It's a great way to put it. You are observing a diagnostic process. The text addresses the specific psychological flaw or blind spot of the person asking the question.
Which means we have to reverse engineer the broader principle from those highly localized corrections. Okay, let's unpack this, because if we want to trace how a person is supposed to cultivate a meaningful life, or even begin to think about leading others, this text completely refuses to start in the public square.
Right, it totally bypasses the boardroom, the university, the halls of government entirely.
It insists that the absolute bedrock of human virtue is established in the home. It argues that we literally cannot meaningfully discuss societal change, ethical leadership, or personal integrity without first auditing our relationship with our parents.
And we see this framework laid out immediately in Book 1, Chapter 2 by the philosopher Yu. He establishes that filial piety, which is this deep-seated reverence for one's parents and fraternal submission, meaning the respect extended to elders and older siblings, are the literal root of all benevolent actions.
The literal root, that's a heavy claim.
It is. And the mechanism he points to is highly pragmatic. He notes that an individual who has internalized genuine reverence for their elders within the private sphere of the home, well, they rarely develop a disposition that seeks to offend superiors or stir up chaos in the public sphere.
So it's like a psychological mapping.
Exactly. The home is the original training ground, where the human ego learns the friction of subordination, of duty, and respect. If the ego cannot tolerate that friction in the living room, it will inevitably manifest as destructive arrogance in society.
He views human character like a tree. If the root system is diseased, the branches which, represent your public life, your career, your societal impact, they're structurally compromised, no matter how much you try to prune or polish them.
Yeah, you can't fake a healthy tree if the roots are rotting.
But I struggle, though, with how this lands for the modern listener. I mean, we operate in a cultural paradigm that fundamentally opposes this framing.
Oh, 100%. Our culture is completely different.
Right. The entire teleology of modern adulthood is defined by separation, hyper-independence, leaving the nest. We valorize the self-made individual who breaks away from their origins.
Yeah, the hero's journey today is all about leaving home and never looking back.
Exactly. So to read a text that places the highest premium on submitting to and revering one's parents, it feels incredibly abrasive. If we are honest about modern behavior, interacting with aging parents or fulfilling family obligations is routinely treated as, a logistical hurdle.
It's a box to check.
Yeah, it's a task squeezed into the margins of a schedule dominated by our quote-unquote real priorities, like career advancement or self-actualization. This ancient framework flips that completely. It suggests that the logistical hurdle is actually the crucible of your character.
The friction you're identifying there is precisely where the text offers its most piercing critique. It actually anticipates this modern tendency to reduce family duty to a mere logistical transaction.
Really? It saw that coming.
It did. In Book 2, Chapter 7, The student Siyu asks about filial piety, and the response he receives is just devastating. The text states, "The filial piety of nowadays means the support of one's parents, but dogs and horses likewise are able to do something in the way of support. Without reverence, what is there to distinguish the one support given from the other?"
Wow. Okay, that just strips away any illusion of moral high ground.
It's brutal, isn't it?
It is. Paying a parent's medical bills, upgrading their phone, or arranging their groceries that might look like virtue to us. But the text categorizes it as baseline animal husbandry if it lacks reverence.
You're just providing shelter and sustenance for livestock at that point.
Right. The text forces a distinction between material provision and moral disposition, and it drills down into the physical manifestation of that disposition in the very next chapter.
Yeah, when Sizzy asks the same question, the response highlights the core mechanism. The master says the difficulty is with the countenance.
The countenance, so the facial expression.
The facial expression, the micro-expressions, the physical demeanor, that is where the truth of the internal state is revealed. I mean, this is a profound insight into human psychology.
It really is, because it's so hard to hide.
Consider the cognitive dissonance of performing a helpful act while harboring internal resentment. You might be, physically installing a new television for an aging parent or driving them to a doctor's appointment.
But if your face is tight with impatience.
Exactly. If you're emitting a subtle aura of martyrdom or sighing loudly, you have failed the test of virtue. The physical labor is completely irrelevant if the psychological posture is one of condescension.
And the psychological feedback loop there is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because, modern psychology tells us about the facial feedback hypothesis.
Oh, right. The idea that our expressions influence our mood.
Yeah, the idea that our facial expressions don't just reflect our emotions, they actually help regulate and generate them. So by commanding the individual to master their countenance, the text isn't just demanding a polite performance.
It's providing a mechanism for internal emotional regulation.
Yes. If you can control your facial expressions of annoyance, you actually begin to neutralize the internal arrogance that causes them.
You are literally rewiring the nervous system's response to inconvenience. And the home is the ultimate proving ground for this because family members are uniquely equipped to see past performative politeness.
Oh, for sure. You can't fake it with your family.
Right. If your benevolence is merely a mask you wear for public validation, it will inevitably shatter under the intimate, unrelenting pressure of family dynamics. Mastering the countenance in the presence of those who know you best and who perhaps trigger you the most requires a level of ego death that makes public leadership trivial by comparison.
There is a boundary here, though, where the ancient application of this wisdom crashes hard into modern realities.
Okay, where are you seeing that?
Well, for instance, in Book 4, we encounter the directive against going abroad to a distance while parents are alive. Or in Book 1, Chapter 11, the text speaks of a 3-year mourning period where a son does not alter his deceased father's ways.
Ah, yes, the 3-year rule.
A listener today, facing a globalized economy, might read that and conclude the text demands career suicide. If you secure a massive opportunity in London, but your family is in New York, are you morally obligated to decline it? Are you supposed to freeze your professional evolution for 3 years upon the death of a parent?
That's a really valid pushback. But this requires us to exercise discernment, separating the culturally contingent application from the enduring psychological mechanism.
Okay, so we don't have to literally freeze our lives for 3 years.
Right. The ancient directives were optimized for an agrarian reality. Physical proximity was intrinsically tied to survival, economic stability, and the continuity of ancestral land.
That makes sense.
But the enduring wisdom within the 3-year mourning period is a profound defense against the arrogance of novelty. When a transition of power occurs, whether it's the passing of a parent or even inheriting a leadership role in a business, the immediate modern impulse is to disrupt.
Oh, totally. A new CEO comes in and immediately reorgs everything just to put their stamp on it.
Exactly. We want to tear down the old structures to prove our own competence, to establish our distinct identity. The mandate to not alter the father's ways for 3 years is a forced pause. It is a structural safeguard against hubris.
Well, it's about slowing down.
It demands that you fully understand the architecture and the hidden wisdom of the systems you inherited before you presume you possess the intelligence to dismantle them. It is about honoring legacy over ego.
You don't assume superiority merely because you are the newest iteration of the family line or the newest manager. You respect the foundation.
Yes.
So for you listening to this, The immediate integration of this philosophy into your life begins with an audit of your countenance. The next time you find yourself inconvenienced by a family member, an elder, or really anyone whose pace disrupts your own decade, pay hyper-specific attention to the muscles in your face.
Notice the tension in your jaw.
Yeah, the tension in your jaw, the subtle shifts in your tone. Are you merely executing a task while telegraphing that the person is a burden? Or are you consciously regulating your demeanor to project genuine reverence? It is an excruciatingly difficult practice, but conquering that subtle domestic arrogance is the prerequisite for any broader impact.
And once an individual successfully establishes that root of reverence, the text immediately shifts its focus inward. We transition from the external hierarchy of the family to the internal architecture of the mind.
Which brings us to the next massive theme. How does a person who has mastered their countenance go about constructing a mind capable of engaging with the complexities of the world?
What's fascinating here is how the framework for that cognitive architecture is crystallized in Book 2, Chapter 15. It says, "Learning without thought is labor lost. Thought without learning is perilous."
That is just such a remarkably precise diagnosis of the two dominant cognitive pathologies we see in society today, and they are wildly exacerbated by our current technological landscape.
Oh, without a doubt. Let's break down the first half.
Yeah, learning without thought. That perfectly describes the modern pathology of information consumption. It's the doom-scrolling phenomenon.
It's the endless feed.
Exactly. We exist in a state of continuous data acquisition, listening to audiobooks on double speed, subscribing to dozens of newsletters, keeping 20 tabs open, absorbing endless podcast streams.
But we never actually stop to digest any of it.
Right. Because this intake is never followed by periods of silent synthesis, it passes through the brain without leaving any structural imprint. It is labor lost. The brain is merely a conduit for noise rather than a crucible for insight.
And the cognitive science fully supports this ancient warning. Without the friction of reflection, what the text simply calls thought information never transfers from working memory into the deep associative networks where true comprehension resides.
So you're just renting the information, you never own it.
Exactly. You feel informed, but you actually understand nothing. And then conversely, thought without learning is perilous. This addresses the exact opposite pathology.
The armchair philosopher.
Yes. This is the individual who relies entirely on their own internal logic, their own isolated deductive reasoning, without ever subjecting those thoughts to the rigor of external data, history, or diverse perspectives.
In the modern context, this is the hyper-partisan commentator, right?
Yeah.
Or the individual spiraling into conspiracy theories on social media.
Absolutely. They construct these elaborate, internally consistent models of reality that are entirely divorced from empirical fact. The text uses the word perilous intentionally here.
It's not just annoying, it's dangerous.
Right. When people operate with supreme confidence based on uneducated, isolated reasoning, they initiate actions that actively damage society.
So it requires a respiratory cycle for the mind. Intake of external knowledge, followed by the exhalation of internal processing.
A respiratory cycle. I like that.
And to facilitate that processing, the text actually provides a highly specific operational blueprint for daily synthesis. In Book 1, Chapter 4, the philosopher's song details his personal heuristic for self-examination.
Yes, he states that he interrogates himself daily on 3 specific points. It is a ruthless daily audit.
Let's go through them. What's the first one?
Point 1. In transacting business for others, was I unfaithful?
Okay, I want you, the listener, to imagine the friction of applying this exact diagnostic to the workday you just experienced. Did you cut a corner on a deliverable because you knew the client wouldn't notice? Did you bill hours where your attention was fractured?
Point 2. In intercourse with friends, was I insincere?
Did you nod along to a conversation while mentally drafting an email? Did you send a text proposing to catch up soon when you harbor absolutely no intention of actually making the time to do so?
And point 3, have I mastered and practiced my teacher's instructions?
Did you read a piece of profound advice this morning, nod your head in agreement, bookmark it, and then proceed to act with the exact same impatience and reactivity you always exhibit? Did you fail to practice what you claim to be learning?
The brilliance of Song's audit is its focus on the mundane. You know, it doesn't ask, did I achieve enlightenment today? Or did I change the world?
Right, it's so grounded.
It asks if you are fundamentally honest in your most basic granular transactions. It forces the abstract concepts of virtue into the uncomfortable reality of daily behavior.
And the text is highly realistic about the timeline required for this kind of cognitive and moral restructuring. We see this in Book 2, Chapter 4, where a biographical progression is laid out in decades.
Decades, not days, not weeks.
Decades. The progression begins at 15, with the mind bent on learning. At 30, standing firm. At 40, possessing no doubts. At 50, knowing the decrees of heaven. At 60, the ear becomes an obedient organ for the reception of truth.
And finally, at 70, the ability to follow what the heart desires without transgressing what is right.
That timeline offers a profound counter-narrative to our modern obsession with 30 under 30 lists and immediate life hacks. True cognitive and moral architecture takes half a century to cure.
What's fascinating here is that the mechanism at age 70 is the ultimate psychological payoff. When we conceptualize morality, we typically frame it as a constant battle against our own nature, right?
Yeah, we view virtue as a state of permanent restriction. We're forcing ourselves to be good by overriding our actual, darker desires.
But the state achieved at 70 represents an entirely different paradigm. It is the achievement of ultimate freedom. By subjecting oneself to rigorous discipline, daily audits, and the constant friction of right action for decades, the very nature of desire is transmuted.
The individual no longer has to force themselves to do the right thing, because the right thing is literally the only thing they desire to do.
It is the complete internalization of the external law. The structure has been practiced so relentlessly that it devolves into instinct.
Think of a master jazz musician. A novice learning the piano is constrained by rigid rules. They must painstakingly memorize scales, chord progressions, time signatures. It feels restrictive and mechanical.
Because it is at first.
But if they subject themselves to that discipline for 40 years, a transformation occurs. They can sit at the piano and follow the spontaneous desires of their heart, improvising wildly, and they will not play a wrong note. The discipline didn't destroy their freedom. The discipline created the capacity for true freedom.
That's a perfect analogy.
So the challenge for you listening tonight is to implement the friction of that discipline. Adopt Tsang's 3-point audit as a journaling practice before you sleep. Force yourself to answer those 3 questions in writing.
Was I unfaithful in my obligations? Was I insincere in my social interactions? Did I fail to practice the knowledge I consumed?
The mere anticipation of having to answer those questions tomorrow night will begin to alter your behavior tomorrow morning. Now, once this internal cognitive architecture is stabilized, the individual must inevitably interface with the broader structures of society.
Right, you can't just stay in your own head forever.
Exactly. In the ancient paradigm, this interface was governed by highly formalized ceremonies and rites. Today, we navigate this through social etiquette, corporate culture norms, digital communication protocols, and public behavior.
Which brings us to a profound exploration of authenticity within a performative world. The text engages deeply with the concept of rights of propriety in Book 3, and the overarching thesis is an absolute prioritization of internal substance over external form.
That's Book 3, Chapter 3, right?
Yes, the foundational critique is delivered there. If a man be without the virtues proper to humanity, what has he to do with the rights of propriety?
Oh, if you're a terrible person, who cares if you know which fork to use at dinner?
Basically, yeah. The argument is that a ritual, a ceremony, or any formalized social interaction is merely a vessel. If the individual performing the ritual is devoid of fundamental humanity, if they lack empathy, reverence, or sincerity, the perfect execution of the ritual is not just meaningless, it is a grotesque pantomime.
We see this principle stress-tested in the text discussion of sacrifice and mourning. In Chapter 12, the text describes the psychological requirement for participating in a ritual sacrifice to spirits or ancestors. The directive is that one must sacrifice as if they were present.
As if they were present, that isolates the mechanism of attention.
And the critical addendum the master adds is, I consider my not being present at the sacrifice as if I did not sacrifice.
It defines attention as a deeply moral act. If you physically transport your body to an altar, and you execute the precise physical movements required by the tradition, but your cognitive focus is elsewhere.
If you are ruminating on a business deal or worrying about your crops,
then the ritual has not occurred. The physical mechanics without psychological presence constitute a total failure of the rite.
This exact dynamic plays out in Chapter 4 regarding mourning, doesn't it?
It does. The student Lin Fang questions what constitutes the core essence of ceremonies, and the response draws a sharp distinction. In the ceremonies of mourning, it is far better that there be deep sorrow than a minute attention to observances.
It forces a confrontation between the messy, uncontrollable reality of authentic human emotion and the polished, highly regulated performance of social expectations.
Which we see all the time today. When a tragedy occurs, society offers a script, a set of minute observances to manage the discomfort.
Send flowers, wear black, host a reception with catered food.
Right, and the text warns against allowing the meticulous management of the event to become a defense mechanism against experiencing the sorrow. The observances exist to hold the grief. If they replace the grief, the ceremony is dead.
There is a story in Chapter 7 that perfectly captures the tension between the material components of a ritual and its underlying human value. The student Tsikung proposes eliminating the monthly offering of a sheep.
Presumably, he approaches this from a perspective of pragmatism or efficiency.
Right. The tradition seems archaic, it consumes resources, and he just wants to streamline the process. But the response he receives is incredibly layered. The master says, "Tzi, you love the sheep, I love the ceremony."
That is a masterclass in discerning different hierarchies of value.
It really is.
Because Tsikung is operating on an economic and logistical heuristic. He sees a sheep, he sees a cost, and he calculates a waste. The response acknowledges his logic, but subordinates it to a higher psychological utility.
The ceremony isn't about the sheep.
No. The ceremony is a socially engineered technology designed to force a community to pause, to synchronize their attention, and to cultivate a shared sense of reverence or continuity in time. By eliminating the friction or cost of the sheep, Tsikung would accidentally destroy the social technology of the pause.
Let's translate this directly into our modern corporate architecture because it maps perfectly.
Yeah.
The modern equivalent of the ceremony is the quarterly offsite, the team-building retreat, or the mandatory all-hands meeting.
Oh, absolutely.
Consider a company that meticulously enforces the rights of propriety, mandatory attendance at the holiday party, forced public recognition exercises, but systematically treats its employees with disdain, underpays them, and fosters a toxic environment the rest of the year.
They possess the rights, but lack the virtues proper to humanity.
Right. And the result is deep cynicism. The ritual becomes a painful performance that employees despise.
But then conversely, consider the hyper-efficient manager who decides to cancel the weekly team alignment meeting because it costs thousands of dollars in lost man-hours.
That manager loves the sheep.
Exactly. They are optimizing for the material spreadsheet. But in saving the sheep, they destroy the ceremony, the only dedicated space where the team synchronizes their psychological presence, looks each other in the eye, and reaffirms a shared narrative.
The enduring wisdom here requires us to evaluate our modern rituals through this lens of intentionality. While we may not be sacrificing animals, we are constantly participating in rituals.
Attending a university graduation, hosting a Thanksgiving dinner.
Sitting in a weekly religious service, or even just the bedtime routine with a child. The terrifying question is how often we are physically present, but psychologically absent.
How often are we prioritizing the minute observances? Ensuring the table setting is perfectly curated for a photograph, obsessing over the logistics of the graduation party,
while entirely avoiding the deep sorrow, the genuine joy, or the profound transition that the ritual was actually built to process.
It's a trap we all fall into.
The application here requires you to ruthlessly examine where you are merely performing your life. In your next significant social interaction or family gathering, practice being there as if they were present. Anchor your attention so deeply in the reality of the people in front of you that the logistics of the event become secondary.
And when an individual can master this kind of authentic presence, they naturally begin to exert a gravitational pull on the people around them.
Which moves us into the final macro-level application of the text, the nature of true leadership and the psychological profile of the superior person. Because if we've established the root in the home, structured the mind through reflection, and achieved authenticity in our social rituals, how does this philosophy scale to the governance of others?
The foundational thesis on leadership is presented in Book 2, Chapter 1, utilizing an astrophysical metaphor. It says, "He who exercises government by means of his virtue may be compared to the North Polar Star, which keeps its place, and all the stars turn towards it."
The North Star. It's a striking visual. It establishes a paradigm of leadership predicated entirely on moral authority rather than positional power or frantic micromanagement. The North Star doesn't dart across the sky, chasing down the other constellations, demanding compliance.
No, it just sits there.
It does not emit directives. It achieves perfect influence simply by holding its position with absolute burning consistency. Its stillness provides the reference point by which everything else navigates. But I have to interject here with a massive dose of modern skepticism. The text draws a sharp contrast between this kind of virtue-based leadership and the more pragmatic law and order approach. In Chapter 3, it argues that if you attempt to lead people primarily through laws, regulations, and the threat of punishments, the populace will simply try to evade the punishment and they will develop no sense of shame. But if you lead them by virtue, they will develop a sense of shame and naturally align themselves with the good. I look at the historical record and I look at the cutthroat reality of modern global markets, and I struggle to see how this survives.
It sounds naive to a modern ear.
Completely. History is littered with virtuous, still North Star leaders who were absolutely decimated by ruthless pragmatists who understood how to wield power, fear, and strict legislation. In our 21st century organizational mindset, we believe entirely in the power of the HR manual, the compliance training, the strict penalty, and the airtight contract.
We assume human nature requires a cage of laws to function.
Yes, this text claims our entire modern compliance apparatus actually degrades human behavior. How does it justify that?
The justification lies in a deep understanding of behavioral economics and human incentive structures. When you build a system based entirely on strict laws and severe punishments, you fundamentally alter the psychological orientation of the people within it. You gamify morality.
That makes so much sense.
When the environment is highly regulated by punitive measures, individuals stop asking the moral question, is this the right and just thing to do? Instead, they ask the adversarial question, what is the exact letter of the law and where is the loophole?
You incentivize evasion.
Exactly. If they find a way to technically comply with the rule while violating its spirit, they feel victorious. That is what the text means when it says they have no sense of shame. They only feel regret if they are caught. They feel no internal friction about the unethical nature of the act itself.
They don't become better people, they just hire more creative lawyers.
Precisely. The reliance on heavy-handed law treats humans as adversaries to be contained. Leadership, by virtue the North Star model, treats them as moral agents capable of alignment.
So it's about changing the culture, not just the rules.
Right. When a leader embodies virtue consistently without hypocrisy, they create a cultural gravity. The sense of shame that the text says will develop is not a toxic, paralyzing self-loathing. It is a highly functioning social conscience.
It's peer pressure, but in a good way.
It is the internal discomfort an individual feels when they realize their behavior is out of alignment with the shared values of a community they respect. They begin to police themselves, not out of fear of a penalty, but out of a desire to maintain their standing within a virtuous culture.
It is the eternal debate between the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. You cannot mandate integrity through an Excel spreadsheet or an employee handbook. You could only model it so fiercely that lacking integrity becomes socially intolerable within your sphere of influence.
And this brings us to the archetype of the leader who actually embodies this, the chunts.
Right. The translation of this term carries immense weight, often rendered as the superior man, the profound person, or the exemplary individual. And the text has a significant amount of time sketching the psychological profile of this archetype by contrasting it with the small or mean man.
We see this dichotomy sharply drawn in Book 4. Chapter 11 states, the superior man thinks of virtue, the small man thinks of comfort. And Chapter 16 adds, the mind of the superior man is conversant with righteousness. The mind of the mean man is conversant with gain.
It identifies the fundamental dividing line in human motivation. When faced with a decision, the small man runs a calculus of personal optimization. What is the most comfortable path? How can I maximize my personal gain? What is the ROI for my own ego?
While the superior person operates on an entirely different frequency, asking, what is structurally right? What is virtuous?
And what I find most compelling about this archetype is its relationship to public perception and the ego. In Book 2, Chapter 13, we learn that the superior man acts before he speaks, and afterwards speaks according to his actions.
It is a total rejection of the performative self.
In a modern context, this is a profound indictment of the personal branding industry.
Oh, completely.
We exist in an ecosystem where individuals are incentivized to announce their intentions, broadcast their moral stances, and promise massive results on social media before they have taken a single material step toward achieving them.
The speech precedes the action.
And often replaces the action entirely. The superior person views this as a grotesque inversion of reality. They generate the material result in silence. The action itself is the statement. Only after the reality has been constructed do they allow their words to describe what has already been accomplished.
It requires immense psychological security to delay gratification like that, to do the work without demanding immediate external validation.
Furthermore, Book 2, Chapter 14 states that the superior person is Catholic and no partisan. In modern terminology, they are broad-minded and universal in their concern. They refuse to be captured by tribalism.
And this applies regardless of whether we're talking about left-wing or right-wing tribalism today. The text doesn't take sides in the political squabbles, it critiques the tribal instinct itself.
Exactly. The small man is deeply partisan. His morality is dictated entirely by whether his specific clique, his political party, or his corporate division is winning. The superior person transcends the tribe to align with universal principles of justice, even if it requires critiquing their own side.
So how do we practically operationalize this pursuit? How do you maintain the posture of the North Star, refusing to become partisan, when you are surrounded by small-minded, deeply difficult people?
The text provides a brilliant psychological tool for this exact scenario in Book 4, Chapter 7. When we see men of worth, we should think of equaling them. When we see men of a contrary character, we should turn inwards and examine ourselves.
This is a radical reframing of interpersonal conflict. It transforms every frustrating interaction into an opportunity for deep psychological shadow work.
The practical application here is potent. Tomorrow, you're going to encounter someone who frustrates you deeply. A coworker will take credit for your idea, a driver will cut you off with profound entitlement, or a family member will make a passive-aggressive comment.
And your biological default will be to externalize your anger.
Yes, to judge them, and to feel a surge of self-righteous superiority. The mandate here is to instantly sever that reaction and use their bad behavior as a mirror. Turn inward. Asks the terrifying question, why does their specific flaw trigger such a violent reaction in me?
If their arrogance infuriates you, is it because you are projecting your own unacknowledged struggles with pride onto them?
If their pettiness bothers you, where are you secretly petty in your own life? When you do this, you neutralize their ability to disturb your peace. You are no longer a victim of their contrary character. You have co-opted their behavior and turned it into fuel for your own internal audit.
You extract the data you need for your own growth and leave their toxicity behind.
As we pull back and look at the sheer weight of what we have discussed, auditing the micro-expressions of your face in your living room, relentlessly examining your daily sincerity, stripping away performative rituals to find true presence, and attempting to act as a North Star in an ecosystem obsessed with loopholes and tribalism, it is easy to feel a profound sense of isolation.
To pursue this architecture of character is to step out of the current of modern normalities. It is an inherently lonely path in the beginning.
You lose people.
You do. When you stop participating in the superficial performances and the partisan games, you will likely experience a social thinning. People who relied on your participation in their performative realities will drift away.
But the text does not leave us in that isolation. Hidden near the end of Book 4 in Chapter 25, there is a singular, deeply comforting guarantee. The text states, "Virtue is not left to stand alone. He who practices it will have neighbors."
It is a promise about the magnetic physics of authenticity. In a world starved for genuine substance, people are exhausted by the performance. They are exhausted by the hyper-partisan noise and the hollow rituals.
If you can actually hold the line, if you can become that North Star burning with quiet, unhypocritical consistency, you will generate a gravitational field. You will naturally draw out the other individuals who are secretly craving that same depth.
It is a call to endure the temporary isolation, trusting the process of your own growth, because true virtue inevitably constructs the most resilient kind of community.
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.